Today we're doing something a little different. There's no nutrition, no lab values, nothing about health or medical conditions. We're talking about writing. And my guest knows the terrain. Dr. Peter Rogers has published more than 40 books. It might be over 50. And if you've seen his YouTube channel, you know how he operates. He has relentless curiosity, a memory that seems photographic, and a habit of reading widely and critically until the signal separates from the noise. When Peter gets interested in a subject, he doesn't skim, he excavates. He's going after primary sources, craft manuals, interviews, the greats and the contrarians, and then he stress tests the ideas in his own work. So we're not just hearing opinions today, we're getting a synthesis of what actually helps you write better. He's going to talk about process, structure, voice, revision, and the habits that make pages happen. I'm sure Peter could speak for hours on this, but he's just giving us some high points today. And through Peter, we will hear from a lot of writers and what they agree on, where they differ, and what's worth stealing. As someone who's written a few books myself with a couple more about to drop, I am here to learn as well. Peter, thank you for doing this. Let's start simple with, what should a writer do tomorrow morning that will measurably improve their pages?
Well, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what do I have to communicate, to say to the people that would be helpful to them, that they would enjoy? So you figure out what's the best message that I have. And then once you know what you want to say, then you say, well, how do I say it? Next step is you should make a mind map of everything you want to include, the central topic in the middle, and the mind map is connecting all the things. You don't want to go outline, because outline forces you to put things in order, and you're not ready to do that yet. You just want to connect everything you're going to include so you don't forget to include something in a book. And once you've got that, you should then make a mini file on each topic so you've got all the information together. It's often good to make a YouTube video about it, have conversations with your friends, and you'll become more aware of what you need to study to fill in the gaps of your knowledge. And then once you're ready, you start putting it all together into a book form. And you have to go through the standard issues. You should know what the conclusion is before you even begin. You should know, have a good opener. And then a lot of other things would influence me. For example, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I love that movie. And I know they made all these jokes in the credits. So I said, I'm going to do that from now on. So I'd always put jokes in the comments, at the beginning of the book, instead of some BS, whatever testimony or advertisement. I would have funny comments that would insult the book or something, because it was fun. And then I would do all kinds of tricks like that. So I think that makes the book more enjoyable. The other thing too is I get right to the point in the beginning. So often, if you don't see anything useful or interesting on the first 2 pages, the book's probably not worth reading. And it's also a sign of inexperience. An experienced author should give you something good right on the first page, at least by the second page. So things like that.
That's great. That's great. I know you brought a presentation today. You ready to start that? Should we just jump into it? Let me get it going here, and I'm going to step out of here.
Okay, so the first thing is the concept of author voice. And basically, I became more in tune with this idea. There's a guy by the name of Peter Elbow, and he's a very good writing teacher. And he emphasized this: the most important thing to a book is the author's voice. And what that really means is the author should be a guide to the new topic, like an intelligent friend. And in addition, I like to think of myself like a tour guide at the Sistine Chapel. So I write my books as if I was talking to an intelligent friend. And other people tell me, well, your book is too complicated. An average person can't read it. And I'm like, well, I really don't care about an average person. Anybody who would consider themselves average would not be curious enough, smart enough to read my book anyway. So I write for the kind of person who's going to enjoy my books, which is an intelligent person, okay, like an intelligent friend. They're going to like what I'm doing. So that's who I write for. And I find that works best. So that way I can maintain like a single authentic voice, like I'm talking to a friend. And it makes it a lot easier to write that way. And then in addition, I try to show them what is good and beautiful and useful about a topic, okay? And also what's dangerous about it, they have to avoid. And I like the Bishop Barron quote. He said, when people see a beautiful Christian painting, they first see that it's beautiful. And then as they contemplate it some more, they feel that it is good. And as they look at it some more, they sense that it is true. Okay, and then the other thing is you have to make a decision as a writer. Am I going to produce useful, interesting content that's unique and valuable, or am I going to kiss butt to a corporation and try to get sponsorship money? Anything done for a corporation, it always stinks, it's always a lie, and it's fake. but in the short term, that'll get you extra money. So if your goal is to make money, that's the path most people take. The vast majority go down that path. But if you start looking at actual great literature, great landmark books, you will see that a very large percentage of them, they were written by people who were exiles, ostracized, imprisoned, half-breeds, posthumous. That's just how it is. Herodotus was a half-breed, semi-exiled from Greece, and he wrote the history of the Persian Wars between the Greeks and the Persians, a masterpiece, okay? All about Thermopylae, the victories at Marathon and Salamis, okay? Thucydides was an exile, fired from the Athenian Army Navy, and he wrote the Peloponnesian War. So you're going to find Aristotle was a Macedonian, hated by many of the Athenians, okay? That is a standard pattern. That's not like uncommon. That is pretty standard, okay? So what that means is if you're going to choose to be a useful writer who writes good, helpful things, accept the fact you're probably going to be ostracized, okay? Now, here's what I meant by a mind map. The topic for today is how to write better. Okay, so you can look at the quotes of other great writers and the advice they give. That's very helpful. I'm going to talk about why pictures are helpful and good metaphors, stories, and jokes. They're very memorable, all of these things, pictures, metaphors, stories, and jokes. People remember something in a story much better than if you just give disconnected facts in a list or something. And pictures, of course, are much more memorable. You'll have some hero often in your mind's eye that's motivating. You could say your muse if it's a woman, if it's a guy, it's a hero. Okay, and then the standard stuff you go through, I just went through that, make a mind map, know the topics that are going to be included. Okay, and then it's good to have role models. We learn from our great ancestors. We're inspired by them. For example, I'm half Irish on my father's side, half Puerto Rican on my mother's side. And I loved Oscar Wilde for the fact he's an Irishman and he went to England and he became the best playwright in all of England. And his books are fun, jokes, puns, rhymes. The Importance of Being Earnest is his best book. And I noticed a pattern that these great writers would say, it is only by entire isolation from everything that one can do any work. Idleness gives one the mood to write, isolation the conditions. There is no art where there is no style where there is no unity, and unity is of the individual. Okay, so anyways, you got to make time to be a writer. I'll come back to that. Goethe, you must focus your energy on the topic. It's very easy to get dissipated in 10 different things, looking at a text message on your phone and that kind of stuff. So you got to decide what you want to do and then focus yourself on it. And you have to be very opinionated. You have to be opinionated to the point where you are going to offend people. If you're not offending some people, you're probably not writing anything worthwhile. And good teaching, think about the best teachers you remember. They were opinionated. They were nice. Growing up, whenever I did something stupid, my father would always say, you just flunked your instant IQ test. And what I've also noticed is that most people have sort of been brainwashed by the public schools and sort of into a sort of like mediocre, apathetic stupidity. It's really, a lefty gaslighting that weakens them. And so, you can't do much about them. And I'm just going to talk about this briefly. For example, if you're offended by everything, scared of everything, you'll never be able to write worth a darn, okay? And so what I'm trying to say is this idea of don't be racist, all cultures are equal, regular sex is the same as anal sex, men and women are the same, that's all BS, okay? It has been known for many thousands of years all people prefer the race they were born into and the culture they were born into. Since you were a baby, you've been looking up at people that look something like you. That's what you're used to. You were raised in that culture. You prefer it. It's familiar, okay, even if it's stupid. Herodotus had written this thousands of years ago, in 450 BC, and multiple other writers. Anybody who looks closely at it observes the same thing, okay? And he wrote, again, the Persian War, which was a history of the Greco-Roman War. Okay, like I said, I'm Irish Puerto Rican, so I love Irish Puerto Ricans. And I'm a Roman Catholic, so I think Roman Catholic is the best. All right, but anyways, Herodotus, being a half-breed, part Greek, part Persian, part barbarian, if you will, the Greeks considered the barbarians Persians. He preferred the Greeks, but he was pretty nice and fair when he wrote about the Persians. And a later writer in the classical Western tradition was Plutarch, who wrote the magnificent masterpiece, Plutarch's Lives. Well, he wrote about Herodotus, and he said, Herodotus, he gives too much credit to the Persians. He's a philo-barbaros. And when I came across that word, I thought it was funny. Philo meaning to love. Barbaros means loves barbarians. So Plutarch was a barbarian lover. Okay, so anyways, I made up an Aristotelian syllogism. Cavemen were barbarians. Cavemen made paintings on the walls of caves. Christians make the most beautiful paintings in the world. Non-Christians hardly ever make any paintings. Therefore, all non-Christians are barbarians lower than cavemen, okay? So anyways, just having fun. So next I would talk about you need to be doing something, try to do something that's new and perhaps a little bit dangerous to conventional thought. If it isn't new and dangerous or change-worthy, then, what's the point of writing it? And I love this scene from the movie Top Gun with Tom Cruise and Val Kilmer, where Iceman was a great pilot, but he was very cautious and safe and didn't do anything that interesting or unpredictable, whereas Maverick was full of daring and new methods, okay? And Iceman says to Maverick, "You're dangerous." And Maverick, meaning it as an insult, and Maverick said, "Yeah, I am dangerous," okay? And that's a good thing, okay? The other thing is you have to be willing to say things that other people are thinking, but they're afraid to say. There's this big crazy thing in the modern world trying to pretend that men and women are the same. Any guy that knows his sister, his mother, his aunts, his girlfriends, or his wife knows women are very different than men. Okay. And all this stuff about a 50-50 relationship, my soulmate who completes me, that's all a bunch of nonsense. Okay. There's a lot of nuance to male-female relationships. Notice that all the college coaches and psychologists are worthless because they can't even tell you the difference between a man and a woman. How are they going to give you advice about male-female relationships? Then you got all these guys on the internet, these dating coaches, guys who have a lot of experience dating and coaching other men. They tell you the truth, okay? So there was quite a difference between, my fiance and the woman who became my wife. As Herbert Spencer said, at the marriage ceremony, the woman gets a ring on her finger, the man gets one in his nose, okay? What did Rodney Dangerfield say? What's the difference between having an arranged marriage or marrying for love? You can spend the rest of your life blaming your parents instead of yourself. Now, Dennis Burkitt was, a great scholar. He figured out abdominal pressure syndrome. He was an Irish Christian missionary. He did most of his work in Africa. He figured out the pattern of spread of Burkitt's lymphoma. That's in the textbooks, but none of his abdominal pressure syndrome or other observations about Western versus plant-based diets is. Anyways, I mention him because he noted as he would travel around the United States giving lectures, some places he would return to them 10 years later. 10 years later, people would remember the illustrations more than anything else from his talks. And here's a talk with Dr. McDougall talking about some of the observations of Dennis Burkitt, how the people who ate a high fiber diet, they had a soft stool, a large stool, defecation was effortless because a large stool stretches the rectum and that causes a reflex contraction for defecation. It's effortless versus a person eating a low fiber diet, meat and processed foods, they're often, defecating with the equivalent of goat pellets. Okay, these do not stretch the rectum. Therefore, they do not elicit that automatic reflex contraction such that they have to strain at defecation called the Valsalva maneuver. That generates intra-abdominal pressure, which spreads upward in the abdomen and downward. Okay, and I made an illustration to that effect. It puts pressure down into the veins, rectal hemorrhoids, into the scrotum, varicocele that can cause infertility. This can cause rectal bleeding. Into the leg veins can cause varicocele, dilated, unsightly veins in the legs, back pressure into the bowel, into the sigmoid. Diverticulum is an outpouching, diverticulosis with multiple. When it pops, that's diverticulitis, inflammation of the adjacent mesenteric fat in the abdomen, common cause of surgery, sigmoidectomy. The stool is dry on the right side of the colon, causing a stool ball. It's also called a fecal lift. Lift means stone. Appendical lift. Mucus glands keep secreting proximal to it, distal to it, and then that will stretch it until it pops. That's appendicitis, okay? And then you get abscesses all over the abdomen because you spill stool into the belly. Stomach pops up into the chest called the hiatal hernia. You get loosening of the lower esophageal sphincter, reflux up into the lower esophagus called gastroesophageal reflux disease. GERD leads to Barrett's esophagus, metaplasia, inflammation, and eventually high risk of esophageal cancer. So this drawing makes it so much easier to remember what I just said. Pictures are very helpful. And there's a study here by Lionel Standing. People could look at 10,000 pictures, and the next day they would have incredible recall for those 10,000 pictures, far, far above what they could recall for words. So we're used to like walking through a forest. Why do you have a brain? Okay, well, first, here's the basic questions about a brain. Why do animals have brain, but plants do not? Because animals move, okay? What is the purpose of a brain? To walk down a path in a prairie or a forest or a jungle and to survive, okay? And as soon as you do that, you have to pick a destination. So you have to make a value judgment. You have to remember how to get back where you came. You have to navigate obstacles and avoid them. So what I'm trying to say is your brain is based on looking at pictures and remembering them and moving, okay? Anyways, Pictures are important and they make things better for everybody. Okay, now here is my dad. He was a psychiatrist. His brother was an engineer physicist. And this is another brother who was also a psychiatrist. And he's a bit of a jerk, kind of nasty. He would always insult my father. He would insult me if I was in the conversation. And I didn't like that. But what I noticed was whenever they came over, they would talk about books. Books, books, books. And it was fixed into my brain as a young kid. That's what men do. They discuss books. And so he would like read a book on Saturday, finish it on Saturday, come over on a Sunday holiday, and then he would like interrogate you about his book. He was a real jerk, okay? And he would call you stupid, you don't know anything, you ignoramus, you know? And so I would go with my dad to the bookstore every couple of months. My dad would buy like 10 books, I would buy about 5 books, and I would want to argue with him. When I was a young guy, you know, I didn't know enough to really argue with him, but I was working towards having that ability. And it was sort of fixed in my brain. I didn't really like school. I was actually in school suspended for my entire 3rd and 4th grade, had to sit in a detention hall and read by myself because I would do the homework in 5 minutes and then I'd goof around, throw a paper airplane, make my friends laugh. And so I was not a guy who liked school. I just liked sports. Okay. My dad was also listening to classical music and Irish music, and I got that from him as well as a love of reading. Okay. This is my mother up here. And my mother was with her Puerto Rican family, cousins and stuff, was very funny. My mom's like the funniest woman that I've ever met in person. She was always making jokes, and her jokes were often very vulgar, but in a nice way. She was just clever. Like a typical example would be, my brother came over with his girlfriend. She's wearing a mini skirt on a cold day, and my mom would say, Michelle, you are going to catch a cold in your pussy. Okay, she would always be saying funny stuff like that. Okay, and she reminded me something like, these are like the 2 funniest female comedians ever, Roseanne Barr or Leonardo Joni, okay? They're funny, okay? Usually women are not that funny. They're not, okay? Let's just be honest. So when I was young, though, I thought my dad was smart, and I wanted to be like him. I thought my mom was just stupid, okay? But the older I got, the more I'm like, wow, my mom's like the best person I ever met in my life. Wherever she would go, everybody was happy and laughing and joking, and she was like a saint. She's on the board of directors of an orphanage. Whenever there was no place for a kid, she would adopt them into our house until there was a place for them. She adopted a bunch of kids for years, okay? If there was a family friend or even a patient of my father having a problem, my mom would adopt them into our house. So we were pretty used to adopted kids being at our house, okay? And also I noticed there's a different type of Christianity between the Irish and the Puerto Ricans. You know, the Irish guys like my dad and his brothers are kind of sophisticated. They can, you know, give you a whole long string of apologetics and debate. Okay. But I noticed that a lot of Irish people, you know, most people just aren't that intellectually sophisticated that they could handle an intense debate. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is the Puerto Ricans is more of an emotional Christianity. And, you know, Jesus is their best friend. Okay, it's non-negotiable. Okay, it's in their blood. And I noticed that was a better type of Christianity. They did so many good things and were so nice, and so many wonderful things came out of that. I was very impressed by that. My mom had all this giant collection of all the saints. She was a minister of care. She did all kinds of things. She was a tour guide. She had an amazing amount of energy, my mom. She was always listening. She also liked all the Spanish music that I kind of learned from here. And I started to see, too, as I got older, when I saw the best speakers in medicine, the ones that had a sense of humor, it made everything better. You could make things more fun, and it was often a helpful way to point out when something was BS. For example, this is Plato, one of the all-time great Greek philosophers, and he was asked to give a definition of a man. And he said, a man is a featherless biped. Okay, and Diogenes, who was sort of like the homeless street philosopher of Athens, he plucked a chicken and he put it before Plato's academy students, and he said, look, behold, Plato's idea of a man. So that sort of thing is helpful for thinking, and it's fun. Okay, so I got that. My girlfriend was a great musician. She was a musician at Juilliard. She's a professional musician now. And, you know, we used to go to all these classical music, and she kind of civilized me. I was sort of like a barbarian wrestler at the time, okay, in high school. And she taught me a lot about classical music, including European history and whatnot. So that was very good for my intellectual development. Her mother was a biochemist who got lupus. And at the time, you know, I was asked about that. I was in med school. I'm like, well, you just go to a rheumatologist. They're the experts on that. I had no idea that I could learn about it and learn more than them or anything. She had a terrible outcome, stroke, died. It was awful. It was really bad. Okay. And I felt bad, but I figured, you know, what am I going to do? I'm just a medical student. I don't know anything. So then I was a wrestler at Stanford, And over at Stanford, all the wrestlers, we listened to tons of country music, Hank Williams Jr., A Country Boy Can't Survive, all that kind of stuff, and heavy metal music, okay? And I loved all that stuff. So anyways, that was that. But I also noticed, because I had so many different interests in music, I collected them all together. I recently wrote this book, Best Christian Songs. I wanted to summarize and categorize all of the Christian and Christian-related music, which includes a lot of stuff, classical, Christmas songs. I included rock and roll, the stuff that's Christian. So if it's not Christian, I won't include it. Gospel, okay, you name it, including Spanish, Irish, etc. Because a lot of music, it's sort of gradually being removed from the internet. For example, a typical song would be, John McCormack, the great Irish tenor, Onward Christian Soldiers. That has been removed from the internet. You can't find it. So I wanted it in my book. If somebody ever tries to recreate civilization, if we head into a dark ages, I want it to have been categorized in my book. And also for anybody who wants to learn it, I have it organized in all the details so they can find it quickly. So one of the turning point moments in my life was I was a freshman at Stanford. I was recruited not for my academics. I wasn't that good of a student at that time, but for my wrestling ability. And then I got injured again. The coach didn't really like me too much. He liked California guys more than guys in the Midwest, and he was trying to take my scholarship away from me. I was real sad. I saw a poster on the wall, one of my sort of heroes, one of the seniors who was an All-American. Don't ask for an easier life. You're not going to get it. Pray to become stronger, because that is achievable. And so I said, man, I am going to become a great student, because I didn't know if I could even wrestle again with all my injuries. I ended up coming back with Student Athlete of the Year. I set the all-time school record for victories at 39. The Schultz brothers helped me a tremendous amount, but it still was a very difficult, sad time for me, because I was failing basically of achieving my goal of being a great wrestler. And then I read a couple guys that helped me. The Alfred Adler inferiority principle, like you feel inferior to people around you and it motivates you to compensate in some way. So like my friends were All-Americans, national champions, world champions, Olympic champions, and I'm, trying to overcome an injury. So I really hated being low man on the totem pole. And I tried to compensate by becoming the best student I could be. Also sort of the Bronsky, he's a Polish psychiatrist, theory of personality, disintegration, reintegration. And it also comes out of the term of hyper-excitability with regard to gifted people. They're hypersensitive, and they're really pissed off when they fail. And you can just be pissed off, and that doesn't get you anywhere. You could say, take your energy and sort of refocus it into something. So to some extent, while I was injured, I refocused my energy into becoming a great student. And I tried to learn everything I could about becoming a great student. I copied Dave Schultz's method of becoming a great wrestler, which is to learn every little detail of your field, how to take notes, how to memorize stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And I like the Maxwell Maltz. I read all the Maxwell Maltz stuff, psychocybernetics and whatnot. Our self-image, strongly held, essentially determines what we can become. All the great wrestlers and athletes were reading this back in those days. I found it real helpful. So you have to get yourself into a mindset where you could be victorious. And you basically have to commit. It's sort of like, the Cortez, burn the boats. This is it. I am going to go for it no matter what happens. Come hell or high water, I'm going to try with everything I got. I would study until I was going to fall out of my desk, okay? There was no other option. There was no turning back. I was going to go for it, and I did, okay? So at Stanford University, my favorite class was Western Civilization, Western Civ, okay, the freshman year, the entire year. We read all the sort of classic books, Iliad, Odyssey, The Idiot and the Oddity, Aeneid, City of God, Consolations of Philosophy, Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Voltaire, all that stuff, okay? And I didn't really understand it that well. I was a freshman in college. I had heard of a lot of it from my dad and stuff, but it was still just coming into focus, okay? But what happened was, by having been exposed to all that stuff, as I gradually heard about it more, I would go back to it later and I would study all of this in much more detail. And I knew it was great. I didn't know the subtlety of it, the nuance of it, but I knew it was magnificent. And my dad had a great appreciation for literature and art and music. And that sort of, it sort of whet my appetite for the whole thing. And I went through a shocking experience when I was in medical school. My father, the psychiatrist, out of ignorance, he almost killed me, okay? He didn't mean to, but he did, okay? And that was one of those traumatic experiences of my life. And the reason I mention all this is, I think this is what life is like for anybody who wants to be a high achiever. You have your, comfortable childhood home, and it's a wonderful memory. But you start going through life and you start making mistakes, you start screwing up, having failures, doing stupid stuff, maybe bad luck happens to you, and you find yourself in a pit in the gutter for a little while, and you have to, the dark night of the soul, you have to say, how am I going to get out of this? How am I going to make something of my life? Your girlfriend dumps you, you get injured in your sport, you're not doing well in school, you're like, how can I make my life work, a success? And you start trying to climb your way out of the pit, okay? And you're often, 2 steps up, knocked back down, 1 step back, but you keep making progress, 2 steps up, 1 step back. That's how it goes. Try to find a good mentor, a good teacher, a good coach, okay? Inspiring books. Like I would read all these quotes and Maxwell Maltz and stuff to kind of get me psyched up. Talking to Mark Schultz got me psyched up more than anything. He's sitting there talking about, kicking the shit out of the Russians, winning the world championships. I'm like, holy crap, I should at least be able to win the next, dual meet, come on. Okay, so anyways, you have to accept the fact you're going to have a lot of setbacks, disappointment. And the other thing, too, is the more successful you get, there will be people who like you and admire you, but there'll also be a lot of people who hate you, especially like in medicine and science. In wrestling and sports, people tend to like a great athlete. But the better you get at science and medicine, it's weird, but you get all these people who hate you coming out of the woodwork because most of them are phonies and they just want to extract money from the system. They don't want somebody coming along, telling the truth, discovering new things. So anyways, you have to accept it. This is the hero's journey. And this also comes from the work, of course, of Joseph Campbell, and he mapped all of this out. And what I'm doing here is simply applying this to my own life and saying it really applies to anybody's life who wants to be a high achiever. And I love this painting which goes with it. This is Sadak in Search of the Waters of Remembrance. But really, it's been viewed in other ways, too. It's also been described as being Prometheus. So here's Prometheus climbing up to the top of Mount Olympus so he can steal the fire from Zeus and give it to the people to help them, okay? It's also, of course, like the struggle to become great at something. There's a lot of time that's lonely before anybody knows what you're doing. Years down here climbing through the depths, okay? And pretty much all I did then at Stanford was read and study, okay? You know the old saying at Stanford, 9 out of 10 California girls are pretty and the 10th one goes to Stanford. In 4 years at Stanford, I never had a girlfriend. In high school, I had gorgeous girlfriend, super babe. I told you my piano girlfriend, she's like a dream, okay? Anyways, what I'm trying to say is it was a lonely place. And I had become kind of socially awkward. So my brother, who was like Mr. Cool, he would just make fun of me. He would say I was, autistic like Rain Man. First you say hello, then you say, how you doing? How you doing? And so I noticed that, nobody would want to talk to me. I would want to talk about science or study skills or a book I just read, and people would look at me like I was weird. So I started to collect all the jokes, and I later on started to collect all the quotes from all the books I was reading and keep a file of all the best quotes and all the jokes. Okay, I loved Rodney Dangerfield, for example, and Caddyshack and all that stuff. And Bill Murray was really funny too, and Scrooge and all this. The Eddie Murphy Raw and Delirious routines, Sam Kinison. And I love Bill Cosby. They screwed Bill Cosby over. What I heard was they screwed him over because he wouldn't go for some BS, I don't know what the details of it were, but I can tell you that show back when it was in the day, it was great, and he was great, and he was a good comedian. And they often do that. They screw over the good people, and then the bad people like P. Diddy go away and don't get in trouble. I hate to say it, but the system a lot of times is evil in Hollywood. All right, so anyways, there were lots of great funny movies. Trading Places, Animal House, Stripes, Family Vacation, American Vacation, Chevy Chase, all that stuff. It was great back in the day, all right? The 1980s was like the most fun decade. So I had literally thousands of jokes, but what we ran into starting about in the 1990s more and more was what I call them the anal sex Puritans. Basically, it's a form of gaslighting where everyone is a victim and you can't tell a joke except for, about white Christian men who they want to Jenna, what side, okay? Because then, the commies can take over and bring back slavery. That's what's really happening, okay? So because of that, I could never use my jokes. I still remember them all and stuff. And I don't remember all of them, but I still have the sense of them. But that's why I never made those into a joke book. I took the quotes and I made them into a quote book. I actually have about 5 times more quotes than what are in the book. It's about a 700-page book, but that's where they all came from. The best quotes of philosophers, scholars, historians, and stuff like that, and founding fathers, all that kind of stuff. Then, as far as medicine, I was really good in school, and I was invited to be the teacher for the younger students. So like when I was a sophomore, I was given all the review lectures for the first-year students, for example. And I also did all the lectures for the urban health program students. So I greatly admired this guy right here. His name is Frank Netter. He wrote this book and a couple other books. He is the greatest medical illustrator ever. He was magnificent. Okay, here's a typical look at his brain, submental vertex view of the brain. Okay. He was a surgeon as well. He knew the anatomy backwards and forwards, and he could convey it in his drawings. And I was just wish that I had learned how to draw. I actually went and took drawing classes, but I just didn't have the time. I was too busy with medical school and stuff. But I loved art, and it's one of the biggest regrets of my life that I did not learn how to draw. But my love of art got me to collect all these art books. I own over 300 art books. It's probably closer to 400. And I spent a lot of time looking at paintings. I love them, okay? And I've got thousands and thousands of paintings that I've organized them into categories. So when I give a lecture or a talk, it's very easy for me to have a metaphor to a famous painting because I got so many of them, okay? They're magnificent, okay? Christian art is magnificent. Almost all of it's Christian. All this multiculturalism is BS. Other cultures don't paint, okay? They almost never do. There's a few exceptions here and there, but in general, they don't. And that's one of the other great things about Christianity. I came to have more and more appreciation for Christianity, not just because of, pie in the sky heaven, just because on earth, it generates almost all the beautiful art, almost the best architecture, the best sculpture, the best literature. Okay, I compiled my paintings, the old paintings, all organized them all and made into this book, Best Christian Art, okay? So that was a fun thing. I graduated first in my med school class, 99% board scores. I wrote a couple of books. This one right here, Medical Student's Guide for Top Board Scores with Little Brown Publishing House. That's my med school picture. When I first started med school, I kind of, I only got like the 10th percentile on my midterm exam, and I was freaked out by that. I expected to be first in the class, okay? So I'm like, how could that happen? And what had happened was the kids from the state schools, they had taken all the classes before, whereas I was studying like this advanced evolutionary biology, counting the number of mitochondria in a bug's ass, while they were learning anatomy, physiology, the classes of med school. So I just knew I had to study more, and I did better, but I spent a long time trying to get my study skills as good as they could be. I literally read everything I could get my hands on with memorization techniques and study skills. So I knew a lot about that and would later write books about study skills, okay? And mnemonics and all that. And that's another picture of me with my mom. And I wrote this book, Quick Medical Spanish. My Spanish wasn't actually that good because when I was first born back in the 1960s, people had an attitude, America is the best country. It's the greatest country in the world. And it was like, why would you give a rat's tail about learning Spanish when you are now in America and you get to speak English? You're so lucky. And my dad kind of frowned on it. So my mom, she regretted it later, but she didn't teach us Spanish right from birth. Then we wanted to learn it. She tried teaching us when we were in grade school, but then we didn't want to learn it. We're little brats. We say no to everything. And then in high school, it was easy to get A's in the classes, just, answering the grammar questions. So I didn't really learn it. I did a little bit of talking with my mom, but not much. And then later on, I started wanting to learn it, and I would talk on the phone in Spanish with her. But my Spanish was never that good, but it was decent enough. And I was the guy who would interview the patients in Spanish, and I wrote the book Quick Medical Spanish, but it's not really that good of a book. It's a good book for where I was at the time, but I later got much better at Spanish. After my mom died, I was all sad, another screw up. I hadn't, gotten good at Spanish, and I read Da Vinci Code in Spanish, listened to all the CDs and stuff. But these are all a bunch of my cousins from Puerto Rico. My Puerto Rican family is super nice. They're real smart too. People would be surprised. You think Puerto Ricans are stupid. You haven't met my family. You would be amazed. Okay, I had basically mastered conventional medicine. First in my class, Harvard trained, okay, as a textbook author. Amherst is like Elsevier's, subsidiary, and they made all the best books in my field, imaging guided surgery. I was the lead author, got published in other languages. And here I am at one of these, animal surgery courses, learning the advanced techniques. But I had gotten fat. I was in my early 30s, and I'd gotten fat. And I noticed my mom had a bad cancer. My dad had, pretty bad coronary artery disease. And I'm thinking to myself, why is this? Well, I'm such a great doctor. Why am I fat? Why is my dad sick? Why is my mom sick? Okay, is conventional medicine just weak and really can't do much? Or am I missing something? I had a turning point in my life too, where it's a long story, but there were a lot of pressures on me to become a neuroradiologist. And I had kind of always wanted to be a neuroradiologist. I had considered that from the start. It really fit with all my interest in optimizing cognitive performance, study skills, cognitive development and stuff. So to make a long story short, I became a neuroradiologist. I went back and did another fellowship, sort of did 2 fellowships at once. I also did a half a fellowship becoming an imaging guided surgeon, endovascular brain surgery, but they were getting screwed over. Neurosurgery had taken over the turf. The radiology-based interventional brain surgeons were getting screwed out of the good cases. So I decided to just do diagnostic neuroradiology. I still do some interventional I still do interventional body a little bit, not much. I mostly do diagnostic neuroradiology and diagnostic imaging and that kind of stuff. And then as a hobby on the outside, I consult in all this nutritional stuff and make my YouTube and books, okay? Because that's what I really enjoy doing. And so I do that all the time on a free thing every day, but I don't do it in a financial way. I love doing it. I wish I could make money doing it, but from what I've seen, there's just so much more money in conventional medicine compared to this other stuff that's why I kept going with that. Okay, so here's a picture of me when I was fat. I got up to 220 pounds, which is heavy. I'm only 5'9", okay, and then I got skinny again. Dr. McDougall was helpful to me. I went on his starch-based diet, and that was really the key turning point. I had lost about 20 pounds, 30 pounds on my own, but I couldn't get it all together. And once I read the starch-based diet, McDougall, I communicated with him a little bit, then it was easy for me. The whole rest, and I optimized my weight. I've always been fit and in really good shape ever since then. That was many years ago. I decided too that, wow, this is amazing. You know, in conventional medicine, they never cure anybody. Cure rate for obesity, 0. For diabetes, 0. For hypertension, 0. For coronary artery disease, 0. They never cure any of the chronic diseases. Autoimmune, 0. And then I look at the read nutrition literature, you know, like Kempner, for example, McDougall. We cure 90% or more of our hypertensive patients, 90% or more of our diabetics, autoimmune patients, obesity, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, holy crap, this is where the power is in medicine. They're reversing coronary artery disease, reversing congestive heart failure, reversing diabetic retinopathy, hypertensive retinopathy, lupus. You know, I'm like, crap, I could have saved my girlfriend's mother, okay? I might have been able to, you know, get my mom to live longer from her cancer. My mom lived a long time. They predicted she'd be dead in 2 or 3 years. She lived about 11 years. And I think that was because of all her Christian stuff. It made her happy, okay? So she had such a strong reason to live that she outlived her prognosis, but I didn't know anything about nutrition at the time. I just felt send her to the oncologist, and the oncologist was our friend. They were friends of our family. The oncologist's wife stayed at our house for a couple of weeks and was my mom's nurse, okay? That's how much they loved my mother, but they, you know, all they knew was chemo, okay? So I didn't know, so I was sad, you know, I felt like I screwed up. I wasn't able to save my mother. My father got talked into open heart surgery, and surgery went fine, but 4 years later, he had a stroke shoveling snow because it was wet and it sticks to the shovel, and you get like a staccato motion as you throw it over your shoulder. You dissected a vertebral artery, caused a clot, focal thrombus, embolized to the brain, stroke, okay? And it wouldn't have happened if he hadn't had a CABG coronary artery bypass graft. So I was kind of pissed off. I'm like, all this work to be a great doctor, and I screwed up, okay? I was a fatso. My mom's dead, my father's sick. So I was sad. I was pissed off. And I'm like, you know, these assholes, they could have taught me. How come nobody taught me this? I would have read any book. I would have read a stack of 100 books, okay? So I started digging through all the books. I went through all the old biochem books, going through more biochem papers. I wrote an entire biochemistry disease book, 760 pages. That was one of my earlier books. I didn't know how to make computer illustrations at the time, but I wanted to figure all this stuff out. I was going to become a nutrition expert. To get out of my fat phase, I moved to a new house. It was a rural area where I could get a lot more land for the money. And I sort of, you know, designed a bunch of things on the house. We had a tennis wall to hit tennis balls against, so full court basketball. I put a net up and back so the tennis balls wouldn't go in the neighbor's yard. Had a pool. It was one of my fat relatives, you know, throwing, you know, his kids up in the sky. We had a lot of fun with the pool, the big yard. You could jog and do sprints. We had animal enclosures. We had turtles. We had chickens. We had geese. There was separate animal enclosures for other animals. It was an awesome yard. Everybody wanted to come over to our house. All of our relatives, all the neighborhood kid friends, the friends from school. And one day I come home from work and my kid says to me, he goes, "Dad, you're a bad parent." And I said, "Why do you say that?" And he goes, "Because the other kids, they help their sons with basketball and you don't help me." He says, "This friend of his dad's the coach of the basketball team. The other boy, his dad practices with him." He says, "All I ever do is work." And I'm like, "Well, buddy, let me think about it." Okay. Our living room at that time was just being used for storage. So I knew I better not ask the wife in advance because she'll always say no. And I just had a buddy come over as a carpenter. We boarded up the window with these boards. I brought a basketball court in. You got a wood floor and a high ceiling. I made my living room into a basketball court. Everybody loved it. The kids loved it. They would play for hours, 3 hours, 4 hours a day. They'd play basketball. All their friends would come over. The little kids would ride tricycles around in the round area. It was great. everybody, the relatives, the friends, everybody wanted to be at our house. And my wife's a really beautiful woman. When I first met her, she's like a perfect 10 in beauty. And she's real stuck up, and she was jealous of me because instead of her being the center of the attention, I'm the center of attention of all places at our house. I would have built an add-on to the house to her. But anyways, when she saw this basketball court, also I converted upstairs bedroom into a racquetball court. So our house was pretty noisy. The kids are bouncing the basketball all day long, or people are playing racquetball upstairs in the weight lift. In the basement, we're doing deadlifts, and you can hear the weights, slamming on the ground. We're doing squats. I got a wrestling mat. I had people come over to wrestle and train. We had a video game spot for the kids too in the basement. It was like paradise on earth. It was the greatest house ever. And really, it didn't cost that much. It was magnificent. Well, anyways, this was the last straw when I put the basketball court in. My wife, she went apeshit bananas. She said, this house is too noisy. You're destroying the foundation of the house. You're lowering the property value. The property value. This is a house, not an effing gymnasium. I'm going to buy a new house and you're going to pay for it. So she did. I thought she was joking. And it took about a year and a half, 2 years, but she bought a new house. And then she gave me an ultimatum. Either you come to the new house or we're getting divorced. And I didn't want to go to the new house. I tell you, you had to drag me. Wild horses had to drag me away, man. I didn't want to go. But I said to myself, in the end, the kids are more important. So I should go with the new house. I'm actually sorry that I did. I should have stayed at the old house because all the kids would have wanted to come back and be with me anyways. But I followed her to the new house, and it sucked. I hated the new house. There was nothing to do there. But the difference was because it was her idea, it was her house, she had to maintain everything. And she basically became like a landlord. And she got real fat. I wasn't attracted to her anymore. I stayed with her for the sake of the kids to keep the family together, okay? And I kind of let her be a landlord. I gave her a lot of money, more than I should have. But I would just write one check a month because to be a writer, you need time to write. So you have to figure out a way, how can you plan a life where you will have time to write? Because there's not a lot of money in writing. So you have to be able to do it as a hobby, or if you're very fortunate, maybe make money, then I just do it as a hobby. So the way I could do it was my wife being a landlord. So even though there were reasons why that was not optimal, and it worked pretty well for about 11 years until she stole a bunch of money from me, had an affair with a truck driver, and divorced me, okay? So that's what happened. She was never that interested in my books. She used them as paperweights for her carpet because the edges were curling up. Okay, so, here's like my old office at that house, the middle house, and I have books on top of books piled up all over the place. I'm sort of like quarantined in the basement, okay? The dog would piss on the ceiling and piss on my books in the other room. All my books were covered up with towels to protect them from dog piss. But anyways, I was able to write a whole bunch of books sitting at this desk, pictures of my parents and stuff. And in my bathroom, for example, I'd have pictures of, beautiful art and also of my literary heroes, for example. And the reason for this is I called it the magic bathroom. You want things that you see every day in your daily presence to inspire you, to motivate you. Different people have had this quote, like Jim Rohn, for example. He says, 5 years from now, you'll be the product of the books you've read and the people you spent the most time around. So I want to be reminded of great people because they motivate me every day. I walk in my bathroom and I see heroic achievements like Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. And I'm like, man, if he could do that, the least I could do is finish this book by next month. So that would give me tremendous energy. I could wake up at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning and just crank on a book all day long. Okay, I would still be writing that book until 6 p.m. at night. I would take little breaks, of course, but it gave me a lot of energy to do tremendous, large amounts of academic work. And all this great art would inspire me. Like, I wish I could be a great artist, or at least I'll try to be a good writer, So all of this motivated me. So I have all these pictures of my heroes on the wall. I call this the magic bathroom. This is at the other house. When I was taking my boards, I was told I got a perfect score on my neuroradiology boards. I would take pictures of all these different anatomic regions, different diseases around my bathroom. I had a little portable table. Again, this is the magic bathroom. I partially got the idea from Mozart because he wrote that, I think it only fitting to write while shitting. And I'm like, well, gee, I ought to have a table in my bathroom. I could read a lot more. And I also got an idea, too, from Monty Python. Monty Python had a skit, every sperm is sacred. So I said to myself, well, every piss is sacred. Every void is sacred. So I would always read typically a paperback or something during number one. During number two is I usually have a big textbook on this table. It's portable. You just move it with your foot. So basically every week I typically read a complete book every week in the bathroom, in the magic bathroom. I listen to an audiobook in the car while I commute to work. So I automatically get, at least 2 books a week read in that way. And I read at other times too. I'll often walk around the house reading, or I'll walk on a treadmill. I read a lot. So I still read a minimum of 2 books a week. But there were times when I would read 4 or 5 books a week if I had more time off. And I had a previous job where I didn't have to, I would get done at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Whereas nowadays, a lot of times I don't get done until much later. In my first couple of years in private practice, I would come home at 8:30 at night. So anyways, I'm just showing you this magic bathroom. It's a way that you can get a lot of reading done. Because the average person you run into, you ask them, if they read anything lately, the vast majority of people, the vast majority of doctors, they don't read anything. They never read anything. They always say, I'm too busy, I'm too busy. And what I'm trying to say is that's a choice. If you read in your bathroom and you listen to a book in your car, you'll read about 2 books a week, okay? And then here's the path to original work. When you're young, you don't know anything. You first start learning a new field, like it's exciting, like my Western Civ class. Then you try to understand it. And you go through a long, tedious grind of how to make sense out of it. You finally make some progress, but then you reach the professional level, let's call it. But if you just stay in convention and do what you're supposed to do, you'll never be that good. This is like the typical professor. They can give a lecture. They basically read out of the textbook. They maybe even wrote the textbook, but it still stinks. It's just mediocre, nothing new, nothing insightful. The vast majority of college professors really, they stink. Okay, let's be honest. Their classes are kind of worthless. All right, if you want to be good, you have to be daring. You have to be brave and courageous. You have to say, no, I can do better than this. Like, for example, typical art book, they're going to show a bunch of, primitive, backward art that a child could make. They're going to show modern art and pretend it's real art. And it's like, go screw yourself. If you want to do that, be a phony sellout, go ahead. But what I'm trying to say is I only want masterpieces. I only want the good stuff. So when I write a book, I'm going to try to figure out what's the truth and tell the truth. And it's not going to get you a contract with a big publisher and get you into the bookstores so you make big money, but you'll do something, you have a chance to do something really good. So you kind of make that choice in your life. Am I going to go for it and try to do something good and useful and creative and have a good time with it? Right now, we live in a bizarre time. We live like sort of in really a sort of a criminal time where good things are attacked and destroyed and bad things are celebrated, okay? Our civilization right now is kind of upside down, but just because it's upside down, I'm still going to be good. I'm going to, like Consolations of Philosophy with Boethius, all right? Just because barbarism and the Dark Ages are taking over, I'm still not going to let the light go out. Okay, so I wrote then, straight A at Stanford on to Harvard, which is really largely about study skills, partly autobiographical, how I figured out all the techniques to memorize stuff, get highest grade in the class pretty routinely. I made a student version, and this is a more advanced version. And then I have a bunch of friends who are lawyers. And, they read my books and they started laughing. They're like, look at this right here. My punctuation wasn't what it should be here and there. And stylistically, they had fun with me. They know more, but they write all day long, okay? So they're making fun of me. I'm like, you know what? I got to learn how to write better, okay? So I then wrote this book, Rhyme, Rhetoric, and Logic, like 3-4 editions of it. I read everything I could possibly read about writing methods, techniques, and what makes good literature and stuff. And so then I made a book about it, Rhyme, Rhetoric, and Logic, okay? And a guy who I really like, for example, is Tom Wolfe. He's a very skilled writer with onomatopoeia, fancy punctuations, his use of semicolons and whatnot. And he has a good quote here. He says, as a young writer, I thought style was more important than content. As I got older, I realized that great writing is about 75% content and 25% style. Yeah, you need to have something to say. So you've got to do your due diligence, okay? You've got to do your studying. You've got to go get that clinical experience. You've got to go find the other experts and see what they know, and can you add anything useful to that? But he really is a masterpiece, one of the few great modern writers, okay? I really liked his book about speech and language and Darwinism, et cetera. I thought that was a very good one. Okay, the kingdom of speech is what he called it. He basically said humans belong in a different kingdom because we have speech. Okay. Then I noticed also when I'm going through scientific paper, who's really good? And what I saw was, like, for example, this guy right here is Douglas Kell. This is a partner who he writes with, Etheresia Pretorius. Why did I like his paper so much? And her papers too. They're both geniuses, okay? Because he would put them into a story, a narrative form, iron behaving badly. And then he goes through the biochemistry of iron. Then he goes through things like amyloid clotting. was by putting it into a story form, it's so much easier to understand, so much easier to remember. If you read a lot of biochemistry papers, you'll see many of them, they basically suck, okay? They're disconnected facts. They're trying to figure it out. The PhDs just don't know enough. They don't have a wide enough spectrum of knowledge. They're just trying to make sense of their narrow field, all these statistics and stuff, and they're just really not that good. But anyways, the point is when you put things into a narrative, it becomes much better. I also loved studying the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, and this quote by Cicero: "To not know what happened before you were born is to forever remain a child." Okay, so you got to study history, otherwise you're an idiot. Like Michael Crichton said, if you don't know history, you don't know anything. You're like a leaf that doesn't know it's on a tree. All right, and a lot of other good things came out of studying Cicero. He's the greatest of all the Romans. If you want to study ancient Rome, just study Cicero and learn everything to do with Cicero. Like read the trilogy of books by Robert Harris, for example. They're magnificent. You can listen to the audiobooks. They're magnificent. If you do that, everything about Rome will come into place. But one of the things to get out of it too is Aristotle had summarized all the rhetoric techniques of the greatest speakers, because oratory was the biggest thing. You have to get up and speak. So you want to learn oratory because those rhetoric methods, they make you a much better speaker. Okay. And I remember one time it was kind of funny. My kid were playing video game with a bunch of his friends, and then they were studying. They were studying for their English class, and I'm walking by, this is years ago, and my kids go, "Dad, do you know anything about rhetoric? What is that?" And I go, "Oh, those are just famous speeches and famous quotes and stuff." They go, "Well, can you give us an example?" And I go, "Well, JFK, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And they go, "Yeah, that's old stuff, Dad, but I mean, is this stuff relevant? Is this useful for anything?" I go, "Yeah, it's like a template. Like you say to your wife, ask not what a husband can do for a wife, but what can a wife do for a husband?" They go, "Oh, yeah, like a girlfriend too." I go, "Yeah." So anyways, rhetoric is useful for writing and for speaking. It's a template for whatever it is that you want to say to make it more impactful. It's an impact booster, okay, like nicotine in a cigarette. All right, then Schopenhauer's magnificent writer about how do you write a masterpiece? How do you write a great book? And he said, first of all, here's some of his quotes. "A great writer writes the quintessence only, nothing that the reader could think for himself. To use many words to communicate a few thoughts is the unmistakable sign of mediocrity. To gather much thought into a few words is the stamp of men of genius. The task is to think what nobody has thought, but what everyone sees. Only he who writes entirely for the sake of what he has to say writes anything worth writing. The greatest works of the greatest men, they all belong to a time when they had to write them for nothing or a very small amount. The best writers are those who have thought before they started writing. They are rare. A great writer writes because he has something to say. He does not write for fame or money because he knows that he will not get any. He writes for great men and for posterity because too few of his contemporaries will be able to follow his thoughts. He plans his book like an architect plans a building. He has really thought about the topic. He has conversed about the topic. He writes about his own thoughts and his own experience. He expresses it in a fresh and forcible way. Simplicity has always been the mark of truth. It is also a mark of genius. The object of science is to recognize the many in the one, to perceive the rules in any given example, and not to go on counting up facts ad infinitum. Since similes and metaphors are such a powerful engine of knowledge, it is a sign of great intelligence in a writer if his similes are unusual and at the same time to the point. A good work is doubly good if it is short. Exaggeration of every kind is essential to dramatic art. One of the things I would say is if you're giving a talk, you can make facial expressions and hand gestures, and that adds to communicating. You can change the tone, speed, volume of your voice, the pitch. But when you're writing, all you've got is those words. So with words, you have to do things to dramatize it, like all caps or exclamation points or something, to add some of that dynamism into the text that, it's not hard, it's difficult to do compared to speaking in person. True excellence, this is Schopenhauer continuing, can only be attained where the work has been produced for its own sake alone. The truth is that the hobbyist treats his subject as an end, whereas the professional treats it as a means. The hobbyist is really in earnest about the matter. He has a direct interest in the topic, And because he likes it, he pursues it con amore. It is these hobbyists and not professional hirelings that have always done the greatest work. And that's another thing. I realized, Schopenhauer is correct, okay? How can McDougall, okay, this little guy out of, bumfuck Detroit, Michigan, be a greater doctor than all these big name guys over at Harvard and Stanford and the other fancy medical centers? And I started to realize that a smart person who decides to really learn the subject and tell the truth because you want to help your patients, you want to do something good, he's better than all the pompous blowhards at the Ivy schools that have just sold out to the drug companies. And I said, wow. And I noticed that. And I started going through the internet and I saw one after another person who was just selling out to sell some supplement or product or promote some bogus food or something. And I'm like, holy crap. The internet needs somebody who really studies the stuff and knows it and tells the truth. No, I go, that could be a good hobby for me. I'm getting old. What the hell am I going to do? That'd be good. That'd be a lot of fun. That'd be interesting. That would be useful. Okay, so that motivated me, and I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew that the conventional doctors, some of the fanciest places, they couldn't cure anything. Okay, they're incompetent. Okay, so Schopenhauer says, it is only in old age that intellectual men attain their sublime expression. And I realized that too. It's like basically, I'm 62 years old. I'm not going to be the best wrestler anymore. You're just physically not as strong and as quick as you were when you were young. Okay. And so it's kind of nice as you get older. You can't be as good of an athlete as you were, as strong as you used to be, but you can keep on becoming a better writer. Writers, as long as they keep good blood supply to their brain, they can keep improving all the way up into their 80s. Okay. Schopenhauer, of all the intellectual faculties, judgment is the last to mature. That's true too. I remember when I was a young guy, all these old, they call them the sage on the stage, these old time doctors, these old guys, they would be these crotchety, grouchy old men, but man, they knew the most out of anybody and everybody knew it. So we'd go to hear them speak. And what I'm trying to say was that's what intellectual tasks are like. Your brain probably is not as fast, when you're 60 as it is when you're 20, but you just accumulated so much more knowledge. Okay. And they would judge stuff. They used to be cantankerous and judgmental. This was kind of a new thing too. There weren't that many women in medicine until about 1995 or even until 2000 or later. What I'm trying to say is medicine became a lot more polite, and especially surgery. Back when I was a young guy, people were pretty brutal. It was just a bunch of men in a mortality conference, and they would yell and say all kinds of insulting things. And it was kind of a harsh environment, but man, we learned a lot. And what I'm trying to say is they were totally judgmental. Why didn't you do that? You might as well just kill the patient. What were you thinking? Okay, it was this intense environment, and they would make fun of you. I was just a little junior guy at the time, but man, I can remember all the teasing and stuff. But it was memorable. I never forget. I can remember verbatim what people would say to me. Okay, like one time when I was an intern, I had a whole list of stuff to do. Intern runs around on surgery. I did an open surgery, general surgery internship. I was a transitional internship through general surgery. And I had my list of, called a scut list to do for the day. Okay, one of the things I was supposed to do is check the post chest x-ray on this one patient. Okay, and so I did everything on my list, and it was written in a little corner, and I couldn't read the handwriting or something, and I forgot to check the chest x-ray. And I didn't understand the significance of it. Okay, it's my first month as an intern. So the senior resident comes up to me and goes, "Oh, you hear about Mr. Jones?" I go, no, and I didn't remember the name. He goes, "He died." Okay, he died because somebody didn't check his chest x-ray. And I'm like, oh shit. I was supposed to check that chest x-ray. And the senior goes, "I'm just messing with you. I checked the chest x-ray. He's doing fine. But don't ever forget again." Okay. That was how they taught you. Okay. It was pretty memorable. All right. So anyways, let's keep going here. Okay. Schopenhauer continues. The intellectual attainments of a man who thinks for himself resemble a fine painting, where the light and the shade are correct, the tone sustained, the color perfectly harmonized. It is true to life. On the other hand, the intellectual attainments of a mere man of learning, they're like a large palette full of all sorts of colors, which are at most systematically arranged, but devoid of harmony, of connection, and meaning. To think with one's own head is to aim at developing a coherent whole, a system, even though it is not strictly a complete one. The really scientific thinker, although he has a need of much knowledge, and so must read a great deal, his mind is strong enough to master it all and to assimilate it and to incorporate it with the system of his thoughts and to make it fit within an organic unity of his insight, which though vast is always growing. The works of truly capable minds are distinguished by a character of decision and definiteness, which means that they are clear. A truly capable mind always knows what it wants to express. the characteristic sign of a mind of the highest order is that it always judges at first hand. Yeah, they're going to be judgmental, okay? They're going to be cantankerous, okay? Like when I first saw McDougal, I thought he looked like Popeye the Sailor Man, this grouchy old Irish guy. I thought it was kind of funny, okay? And at first I thought he was, maybe full of BS, saying that milk was no good for you. I'd heard all my life milk is this great food, it makes you strong, your bones, your muscles, okay? All right. So anyways, this is Schopenhauer continuing. Good writing should be guided by a rule that a man can only think of one thing clearly at a time and should therefore not be expected to think of two or even more at the same moment. So yeah, when you write your sentences, you should be clear. Like, I don't like that purple prose, that Victorian prose, where these sentences are too elaborate. Sometimes there's a place for it, a descriptive, a positive, for example, thrown in by Dostoevsky. That is helpful. But it's much better to write like Hemingway than like Faulkner, although I would say a style somewhere in between is probably best, like Tom Wolfe. Okay, and I like Schopenhauer's quote here: "A happy life is impossible. The highest a man can achieve is a heroic life." And what I mean by that is, if you seek happiness, you'll probably end up sad, chasing pleasure. Like if you put your pleasure in a woman, you might love her, do everything for her, and then she just dumps you and cheats on you. So you're not going to find lasting happiness that way. And it's kind of like Aristotle said. Aristotle said, the greatest of all pleasures is contemplation and learning, because unlike the other pleasures, it is continuous and can endure the entire day. The other pleasures are fleeting. And so there's truth to that, because like my kid will ask me, he says to me, "Dad, why do you read and study so much?" He says, "You have the worst life out of all the people in the family." He says, "Your life sucks." He goes, "But you're the happiest person. Why are you so happy?" And I said, "Because I know who I am. I know what my destiny is, and I'm fulfilling my destiny. I was born to be a scholar. Scholars like writing books and lecturing and teaching and stuff. Is what we do." And he's like, "Why don't you go to the beach with Mom?" I'm like, "I don't want to spend the whole day driving to the beach and rubbing that sunscreen crap on myself. I can go outside for 30 minutes and get my vitamin D." So anyways, now here's Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand wrote a magnificent book called The Romantic Manifesto about literature, and she is a great scholar. This lady's the smartest woman who ever lived. I've read her books. Everyone says, yeah, she's a bitch, she's a grouch. Okay, fine, whatever. Anytime a woman is a great achiever, they always say she's a bitch, okay? But she had done her homework. She read through the literature. She read through philosophy. Okay, so here's a couple of quotes from Ayn Rand on becoming a better writer. "Don't ever give up what it is that you want to be. It is worth it to pursue it. You should try to live up to your exalted vision of yourself. Imagine a person growing up in a bleak, brutal, primitive society, I would say like ours, seeing nothing around themselves except struggling to survive with no hope. Imagine then that a traveling movie theater comes by and they have a movie about New York City with all its great buildings and achievements. That is the meaning of art. That is what art can do. Art is the concretization of metaphysics." I'll say that one again because this is a very important quote. Art is a concretization of metaphysics, where you manifest what you think is true and important and great. Art is the fuel to the soul. Art is a selective recreation of reality according to the artist's values. Okay? There were three great ages of art and literature: the ancient Greeks, the Renaissance, and the 1800s. If you study, you will see that is true. Victor Hugo is the greatest novelist who ever lived. When reading his work, one feels as if they are entering a cathedral. Fyodor Dostoevsky is also one of the greatest novelists. To read his work is to walk through a chamber of horrors, but with a strong guide. Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz is the greatest technical novel of all time, but I don't agree with his glorification of Christianity. Quo Vadis is basically, that means, Domine, Quo Vadis, Lord, where are you going? It's about St. Peter's question to Christ, his vision of Christ. I'll go into that later, but the point of it is it's a magnificent novel which contrasts the brutality of the ancient Romans versus the early Christians. And it's also a love story, okay? It's a magnificent book. It's a good movie too, but it's a magnificent book. The audiobook is great. Ayn Rand studied all the philosophers and she liked Aristotle the most. It seems to me she kind of thought Jesus Christ was a bit of a wuss, allowing himself to be crucified. It also seems she really liked the idea of a male hero, strong, intellectual, businessman, achiever, brave, okay? And she wants to make life on earth better, not just pie in the sky afterlife, okay? And she's kind of funny. She loves Christian literature nonstop. She goes on and on about all the great Christian writers, Rustan, Schiller, etc. but she thinks Christianity itself is a little bit wimpy and controlling. Okay. All right, so anyways, a little more. Here's her book, Ayn Rand, The Romantic Manifesto. Trust me, this is a masterpiece, one of the all-time greatest books. Two greatest books about literature are Ayn Rand's Romantic Manifesto and Schopenhauer's The Art of Literature. They're both masterpieces. They're also very short, easy to read. You can blow through either one in a weekend. Okay, so here's Ayn Rand when she's introducing this book. She says, I am the bridge between the aesthetic achievements of the 19th century and the minds that choose to discover them. It is impossible for young people of today to grasp the reality of man's higher potential and what scale of achievement it had reached. But I have seen it. I know that it was real, that it existed, that it is possible. It is that knowledge I want to hold up to the sight of man over a brief span of less than a century before the barbarian curtain descends altogether, if it does, and the last memory of man's greatness vanishes into another dark ages. Yeah, it was sort of like World War I is basically almost like a suicide attempt of Western civilization. It's a disaster, okay? The end of all that. She continues, it was Aristotle who said that fiction is of greater philosophic importance than its history, because history represents things only as they are, while fiction, it represents things as they might be, as they ought to be. The primary value of art is that it gives man the experience of living in a world where things are as they ought to be. This experience is of crucial importance to him. It is a psychological lifeline. And I think that's a wonderful statement. What she's basically saying is, when you see all these great men of the past and all the great things they did and the great things in their society, like you read about the Athens, it's like, holy crap. Schopenhauer said to read about the ancient Athenians, one says, where did all these towering genius giants come from? You say how magnificent they are, and you say, well, gee, maybe I could be like them. I'm going to try to be like them. It inspires you to see the potential in your own life. So it's very valuable to have exposure to it, to read about it, to learn about it. Okay, same thing with the Renaissance. And then the 1800s, man. Most people don't know about the 1800s. The 1800s were magnificent. If you're interested in art, look at the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and their disciples like Edmund Leighton. It's like, holy crap, were they good. Okay, she continues. The distance between Victor Hugo's world and ours is astonishingly short. He died in 1885. But the distance between his universe and ours, it has to be measured in aesthetic light years. He is virtually unknown to the American public, except for some vandalized remnants on our movie screens. His works are seldom discussed in literary courses of universities. He is invisible to the neo-barbarians of our age. And I hate to say it, but most people kind of go through life being like barbarians. They don't learn this stuff, and they miss out, and it runs the risk that it's all going to be lost. Ayn Rand continues, modern readers, particularly the young, should be cautioned that a first encounter with Hugo might be shocking to them. It is like emerging from a murky underground filled with the moans of festering half corpses into a blinding burst of sunlight. Yeah, Victor Hugo's magnificent. Read Les Miserables. It's one of the all-time greatest books. And as a matter of fact, the greatest novels of all time were written in the 1800s, okay? Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, okay? Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Quo Vadis by Henry Sienkiewicz, okay? I mean, there it is. All right, and then, she loved Aristotle as the greatest philosopher ever lived. He is the real father of individualism, okay? And he summarized the known useful knowledge of his time. He's primarily a biologist, but also a philosopher, rhetorician, scholar, teacher, okay? And I also thought, you know what? I could try to be like a modern Aristotle, not as smart as him, but I know a lot, and I think I can put it all together. So I wanted to try to become like an Aristotle, okay? And I like these quotes like a Will Durant. Will Durant said, the best a man could do, he's a great historian. He summarized all the history of the world. I read through his volumes. I listened to audiobooks in the car. The best a man can do is to learn the good things in civilization and try to transmit this to the next generation. If a man is fortunate, he will, before he dies, gather up as much of his civilized heritage as he can and transmit it to his children. And to his final breath, he will be grateful for this inexhaustible legacy, knowing that it is our nourishing mother and our lasting life. Civilization is not inherited. It has to be learned. If the transmission should be interrupted, civilization will die. Will Durant, great historian. And here's the great painting of Aeneas carrying out his father Anchises out of burning Troy. Okay? So it's the duty of the younger generation to carry on the knowledge of their fathers, the wisdom of the past, of their civilization, and transmit it to the next generation. So that's what I decided to do as well for nutrition. So I picked up Dr. McDougall and he said, "Put me down, you arrogant little upstart. I will kick your ass. I'm the Fighting Irish." So try to transmit the past to the younger generation. I summarize his work in this book here, and I wanted to learn it, for the benefit of the audience that reads the book, but for my benefit too. He's the greatest doctor. I wanted to become the greatest doctor, so I had to study everything he wrote, and I did, in his videos and his newsletters. Okay. Also, there's other writers I learned a lot from, like, Hemingway, for example. The writer's job is to tell the truth. Okay. In order to write about life, you first must live it. Dostoevsky was made by being sent to Siberia. The most essential gift for a good writer is to have a built-in shock-proof bullshit detector. Okay. Oh, for a true writer, each book should be a new beginning. He should always try for something that has never been done before or that others have tried and failed, to try to make things better. Okay. Okay, and sort of my style of writing would simply be, you got to provide the basic useful info, but it's nice to connect things together to the point where you reach an AO. That's called an academic orgasm. Okay, and then you got to get back to basics. Not everybody's going to be able to follow all this, but so this is stuff for people who can't follow the complex stuff, but to still hit the AOs, for the people interested in the nuance and the beauty of understanding the connections. Okay. And also, a couple years ago, back around 2020, we went through I guess you could call them the lockdown days. Nobody knew what was going to happen. I had like 6 books in my head that I wanted to write, but I didn't really have that much time. So I started trying to figure out, how could I do this? How could I do this? I wanted to try to do something like Isaac Newton back in 1665, Anno Mirabilis. And that year there was like a plague in England. So he had just finished college. He went over to the family cottage in Woolsthorpe by himself just to study and think. And, he saw the apple drop and it gave him ideas about gravity. He did his works. He invented calculus, some of the laws of physics, the laws of optics. It was like the most amazing scientific year of any person who ever lived. He's probably the smartest person who ever lived. Okay, him and Aristotle. All right, so anyways, that inspired me that he could do so much in 1 year. So I said, I'm going to try to do as much as I can. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? Nobody knew if they're going to live or die or what the heck was going to happen back then. And I also was really impressed by this guy right here. This is Robert Pirsig. He wrote the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And he was a guy who was working a lot. He had kind of come from a pretty academic background in University of Chicago and all that stuff. But what he did to write this book was he would go to bed really early, like at 8 o'clock at night. Then he'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and he would write. You always want to write first thing when you wake up because the brain cleans itself at night through the lymphatic system. The neurons basically, your brain can't go offline in the daytime because you have to have all your neurons functioning with precise, electronic ionic gradients. It can only go offline at night while you're asleep. So the perivascular spaces of Virchow-Robin around the neurons, they open up and cerebral spinal fluid, CSF, rinses over the neurons. And like, English people in the 1800s dumping out their chamber pots in the street, the neurons pump out their waste products and the cerebral spinal fluid rinses it away like a river, a hose, rinsing the crap away. All right. So when you wake up in the morning, all your neurons are fresh. They're ready to go. That's the smartest you'll ever be. So if you're doing any type of creative work, you want to do it first thing when you wake up. Do not get a cup of coffee. Do not take a shower. Do not exercise. Get to work immediately. That's a key thing. Plus, you get this psychological momentum going where you can get more work done. Okay, so that really inspired me. I also was inspired by this quote from this. It's actually on a YouTube channel, Inside the Score, all about classical music. It's a great YouTube channel. If you like classical music, you'll love that channel. Okay, so anyways, it says, resources are the enemy of creativity. At first, I'm like, well, what does that mean? Resources are the enemy of creativity. That sounds like bullshit. Wouldn't you want more resources? But no. You want to simplify things. When you know what you need to do, you've got what you need, go for it. Do it. You can worry about resources later. You have to get to work. You're never going to have perfect conditions. You're never going to have everything you want in terms of time, in terms of you've checked all the resources, all the books. You need to go. All right. Because a lot of times I'll see I've got, about 6-7 days this month where I could do it. So I plan. That day comes and I pounce on it and start cranking out the book. So I like this quote here by Robert Pirsig. If you're going to repair a motorcycle, an adequate supply of gumption is the first and most important thing, most important tool. If you haven't got that, you might as well gather up all your tools and put them away because they won't do you any good. Gumption is the psychic gasoline that keeps the whole thing going. If you haven't got it, there's no way that motorcycle can possibly be fixed. But if you've got it and you know how to keep it, there's absolutely no way that motorcycle can keep from being fixed. And that's what you got to have. You got to have that intensity. I'm going to do this. I'm going to write this book. I've made my mind map. Now go. I did part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, part 6, part 7, and just crank it out. And just write the rough draft. You know, like Hemingway said, the rough draft's going to be less than perfect, okay? But then you go back over it, you correct everything, you organize it, make sure it flows. That's your book, okay? Robert Pierce said, you want to know how to paint a perfect painting? It's easy. Make yourself perfect and then just paint naturally. That's what all the experts do. Okay, so what he basically sort of means by that is you have to have something to say. You already know how to say something. Have a conversation with a friend that puts it into your mind. What kind of questions are going to be asked? What are you missing? Then study how to write better so you can communicate more effectively. And now you've made yourself a good writer. Then just do it. Okay, and I love binary opposition style of writing by this guy, John Ruskin, the great art critic of the mid-1800s. And he especially was a good supporter of the pre-Raphaelite brotherhood of painters to help them get established. What pre-Raphaelitism was all about was these painters in England in the mid-1800s. They had noticed that Raphael, after he made his masterpiece, The School of Athens, which is here in the painting, which is right behind me, by the way, they were a little bit, Raphael, too much into making everything beautiful. And he'd been less devout in his religiosity. And they felt there should be more of a callback to some of the earlier artists who they felt had a more sincere devotion to the religion and put their faith above their sort of artistic, physical beauty, if you will. Okay. And John Ruskin was a big believer in that idea as well. I think it's also because he was a bit of a Scottish, Calvinist, Protestant, Anglican type, that he's a little jealous of the Catholics too. But be that as it may, this is a masterpiece of a speech. I'll read it quick just because you can type in pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood speech of John Ruskin, 1853, and you'll hear somebody with an English accent say it, and it's magnificent. I'll just read you part of it because it's so great. It's like the greatest art speech ever made. There have been 3 ages in painting. The classical period ending with the fall of Rome. The medieval period extending to Raphael. Following Raphael is the modern era. Classicism art was pagan. Like here, this is the Hill of Parnassus. Medieval art was Christian. Modern art denies Christ. All ancient art was religious. All modern art is profane. The ancient art was moral. The modern art is immoral. In medieval art, truth is first and beauty second. In modern art, beauty is first and truth second. All ancient and medieval art was religious. All modern art is profane. This distinction is as firm as light and darkness. He who offers God a second place offers him no place. Raphael, on one Vatican wall, wrote that the kingdom of theology is presided over by Christ. And on the other wall, he wrote that the kingdom of poetry is presided over by Apollo. That's Apollo on Mount Parnassus. And from that spot and that hour, the intellect and art of Italy date their degradation. Raphael elevated the creations of fancy to the same rank as the objects of faith on the other. The doom of the arts of Europe went forth from that chamber. The medieval principles that led up to Raphael, and the modern principles lead down from him. Just as classical art was great in building to its gods, medieval art was great in building to its God. Modern art is not great because it builds to no God. What a magnificent speech. And I started to look at things, and I'm like, gee, Les Miserables, magnificent. All this Christian art, it's magnificent. And I go, what is modern art? It's either a fake piece of junk that a child could make, or it's degradation and insults. Like here, in this Rotterdam museum, they got statues of turds, okay? That's an insult to an audience to make a turd, okay? Because remember what Ayn Rand said, art is a concretization of metaphysics. If you think a turd is worth making a picture of, you're sick in the head. Can you imagine a Renaissance artist came to a modern art museum? He said, you people are disgusting. You are devils. You are evil. You are the scum, lower than a barbarian piece of crap that you'd make a piece of crap in your museum. What is wrong with you? And then here is the magnificent cathedrals, buildings built in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, the greatest, most beautiful buildings ever made. The ornate sculpture on the 3 doors, the little statues of the Old Testament kings, okay? It's just incredible. Heavenly, the stained glass windows, the rose window. What's a modern building? Like Tom Wolfe had said, the great writer, we saw a picture of him earlier. He says modern buildings, they look like animal cages, and there was always a statue of a turd in front of them. And Picasso was a scumbag communist, okay? He's a piece of crap as an artist. A kid could make this. Stupid. But these phony professors pretend it's great. And I saw the people who really did great things. Michelangelo, Pietà, okay? He said, all my hope and faith I put in Christ. Johann Sebastian Bach, all my work is to the glory of God, greatest composer who ever lived. Isaac Newton spent more time studying the Bible and writing about it than he did doing science. I'm like, Christianity inspires all these people. And I vowed that I would do what I could to protect the proles with their health, to teach them about Western civilization and Christianity so they could enjoy it for a better life here on earth, and who knows, hopefully hereafter as well. And it's the only thing, if they wake up and realize it, that it can save them from inevitable slavery, because that's what's coming. If Christianity doesn't come back, that's what's coming. It's inevitable. If you read history, you will understand that. Study Russia in the 1900s, okay? And I realize, too, that I'm going to pay a price for it, but what the hell else am I going to do? We're all going to get bumped off or enslaved anyway, so you might as well try to save civilization. Prometheus, because Zeus punished him for stealing fire to give it to the public, just like Big Pharma, Big Medicine punishes doctors who teach the public about the low-fat vegan diet, which can cure all the chronic diseases, which is about 75% of disease, okay? Prometheus bound in the eagle of Zeus, okay? And, like Quo Vadis, Domini Quo Vadis, Lord, where are you going? Jesus said, because you have betrayed your people, I am going back to Rome to be crucified again. St. Peter said, I'm sorry, I will go back to Rome. It's Quo Vadis, Annibale Carracci made that painting. So anyways, I also said to myself, what needs to be done is somebody has to teach the public again how all these things go together. It was the Catholic Church that invented the modern scientific method. And the great man who helped put the Renaissance on track, the scholasticism, was St. Thomas Aquinas, the unifier of faith and reason. So I said, you know what? I'm going to try to be like him too, the unifier of faith and reason, because they go together. You can't have real science without Christian ethics. You can't have real healthcare without Christian ethics. People say, oh, you don't need religion. Religion's BS. We don't need that. We want to be objective. Let me tell you something. You get paid $200,000 for open heart surgery, and you never cure the patient. You get paid $30,000 a piece for coronary artery stent. Typically, let's say you place two of them, $60,000. For teaching people the vegan diet, you probably get nothing. If you're lucky, you bring them into a course for a week or something, get maybe a couple $1,000. What I'm trying to say is there is so much money. There is tons of money. If you lie to people, you cheat them, and you give them crappy treatments. So they will always get crappy treatments and ripped off unless Christian ethics say, I love this child, I love this patient like I love my own children, and I will put their value, their interest above money. You have to have Christian ethics. Like Christ said, that which you do to the least of my brethren, you do unto me. You treat them right. You care more about the person than the money. Only Christianity can make you do that. That's it. And the concept of Genesis, okay, that man is created in the image of God. Therefore, he's intrinsically of value. He's part divine. Yeah, he's part beast, but he's also part divine, okay? He has intrinsic value. We should not abuse him, like the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Man's entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution to free speech, to property, okay? Unless you have that, big money is always going to want exploitation and more money, and you will not be able to make things good. It's just a fact, okay? I learned a lot about cognitive development, raising my own kids, and I wrote these books about how to raise IQ. IQ is easy to raise. There's easy things you can do. Then I started writing all these books. I didn't know how to draw yet. These books were actually technically well written, but I didn't have illustrations yet. Illustrations are kind of nice for health books. So I wrote a whole bunch of them. I kept learning more and more and finding it so interesting. I figured out the whole spine. I've given other lectures about that here at VegSource. And I loved little things like we talked about, the Book of Kells, the ornate illustrations in the margins, the Monty Pythons. We talked about that in the comments. I also made acknowledgements that were funny. I forgot to include them in this talk. I know this talk's going on a bit long, but they're all funny. All these funny names that are joke names, the whole Phil McCracken series of jokes. And here's a typical example of the comments I would put at the beginning of a book, from an internal medicine doctor. Dr. Rogers is an arrogant a-hole. Who is he to say that internal medicine doctors are a joke? Just because we never cure obesity, hypertension, diabetes, autoimmune disease, or chronic kidney disease, and lots of us are fat and sick with these diseases, that doesn't mean we're incompetent. Yes, it does. Okay, here's a psychologist. Okay, I already made that joke that, how can a psychologist give you relationship advice when they tell you they can't tell the difference between a man and a woman? It's a joke. Here's what one of my internal medicine doctor friends said to me. He said, Pete, out of all the medical books ever written, yours are the best medical books ever written, you and McDougall. He says, but they will never be shown to students. Your books will never be shown to students. They're never going to show McDougall either, but yours will definitely never be shown to students. There's too many jokes. You make fun of conventional medicine and the drugs. You include religious paintings. The medical industrial complex would lose money. The senior attendings would feel it was an insult to their prestige. They don't want to have to learn new stuff. If you ever were allowed to speak, they would go out of their way to discredit you. That's just the way it's going to be. And he says, if you ever get accepted into one lecture, you will be immediately attacked by all of them and discredited. He goes, low-fat vegan diet will never, ever be welcome in conventional medicine. Okay? All right. A typical thing I'll do with a book is on the cover, or the inside cover, I'll put a picture of something like this. This is my book about how to prevent stroke and heart attack. And I put a crucifixion picture of the Holy Grail with Gaudenzio Ferrari, 1513, where they're collecting the blood out of the wound in the side of Christ. He has 5 wounds, each 2 wounds, in the hands and the feet. That's 4, and then 5 with the wound in the side. So then I call this, the comparison picture is the 5 wounds of the village idiot for going for a coronary artery bypass graft. Sternotomy, crack the chest with a rotating circular saw to get access to the coronary arteries. You got to pop in a mediastinal tube, pop in a chest tube, right internal jugular vein, swan, pulmonary artery, pressure catheter. You're going to have to do a preliminary cardiac cath, go from the groin, femoral artery, femoral vein. So those are the 5 wounds of the village idiot. Because why would you get an open heart surgery for coronary artery disease when it has a 0% cure rate? You can go low-fat vegan for free. It has a 100% cure rate if you actually follow the diet. For an opener, I'll do something like ask questions, because questions are almost like they generate the desire to answer the question. And I'll use big print, easier to read, color-coded text. It's more easy to read. What is atherosclerosis? It is a blood clot. That simple statement, 99.9% of doctors don't know that, okay? That's an AO, academic orgasm. So a little bit of joking, innuendo, or something fun. Here's my book on atrial fibrillation. FAQs, frequently asked questions for atrial fibrillation. Why is this the best book on AFib? So also, when you make a big claim, you have to back it up. But I want to write a book on a big theme, big promise, contrarian, little jokes and metaphors. Like here's the joke, I thought of this. I said, gee, the male wallet looks like a male Virginia, doesn't it? And the women, my wife, loved to penetrate it. All right, once I learned that photos make better covers, I started using photos for covers. I rewrote all the internal medicine textbooks, Medical Reformation, Vegan Renaissance. It's a landmark book. It is a rewriting of all the internal medicine textbooks. And then I wanted to make a path in case everything gets deleted off the internet. Who the heck knows what's going to happen? I wrote top 50 books in health and nutrition. So a person could systematically, those are the best books I read. I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books about health and nutrition and chemistry, biochemistry, et cetera. These are the best ones. Okay. Underground Guide to Study Skills was just sort of a simplified book to study skills that even a junior high kid could read. My other ones are a little more advanced, like for high school or college age or grad school age. And I started writing these shorter books. My girlfriend got on my case. She's like, your books are too complicated. They're too long. They're too expensive. Nobody's going to read them except a few technical people. But the regular person's not going to read that. They just care about their own disease. So I started writing all these short books. How to prevent stroke and heart attack, prevent AFib, CHF, prevent hypertension, reverse diabetes, reverse obesity, reverse kidney disease. And like I said, the world is right now in a struggle between, atheistic Darwinism, communism, and whether or not we're going to return to Christian ethics. People don't need to be Christians, but they got to have Christian ethics if you want to have a society where people are nice to each other and they protect the weak and the poor. Anyways, that's it. I hope people found that helpful.
All right, guys, that was a master class. And the big takeaways for me, go for it and try to do something good. Have something to say. Do your due diligence. Use fewer words to say more. For me, write daily, even if it's brief. Read like a writer. Writers read and revise with a cold eye. Was some of these quotes I loved. Exaggeration of every kind is essential to dramatic art. That's when there were so many great ones in this talk. Of all the intellectual facilities, judgment is the last to mature. Some great Schopenhauer quotes here you have. And art is the concretization of metaphysics. Art is fuel to the soul. So, Peter says, write with stories. People respond to stories, jokes, human touches, a narrative. Dr. Rogers, thanks for opening the toolbox and showing us what actually moves the pages along here. And if this helped, give it a like and share it with someone who's wrestling with a draft. I will put links to Peter's channel in the description below, and I'd love to hear from you. What's one change that you're going to make in your writing routine this week? Peter, thank you again. Appreciate it a bunch. I'm Jeff Nelson. I'll see you on the next one.